all the talk about minimum wage, ensuring that workers in Nigeria earn something substantial, at least to get them home. Well, whether or not it would take them home is another conversation entirely, but something substantial to afford the basic necessities of life. But on the flip side of that conversation is productivity. You'll have heard the earlier conversation we had, and Mr. Paul Alaji was talking about how productivity needs to follow, else we'll find ourselves in a recession. So this morning, we're talking productivity, and we have joining us in our studio the president of a Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, CIPM, Mr. Ahmed Ladan Gobir. He's right here with us in our Lagos studio. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Morning Brief.
Good morning, Eddie. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I know that this is something you deal with on a daily basis, particularly as human resource managers or personal managers, as the case may be, you know, the negotiation. This is how much I want to earn, or this is how much we can afford, and it goes back and forth. But this is on a bigger scale, and we've seen how much it has affected us as a nation. So I'd like to get your thoughts about the approach of government and labor to this minimum wage negotiation. Is this really the most optimal way to approach it?
Okay, thank you very much once again. The law in Nigeria, of course, favors tripartism. The law requires that after maybe 5 years, in the case of the current, the Minimum Wage Act, which expired April, that parties, tripartite parties to the minimum wage discussion, of course, will come to the table to negotiate a new national minimum wage, for workers in the country. Tripartism, of course, means you have the government on the one side, you have the employer associations on one side, and of course, the labor. So these three parties are expected to come to the negotiating table, of course, to discuss a new minimum wage and set one, of course, recommend one to the government, which then, of course, takes it to the National Assembly through a bill, which the National Assembly, of course, then enacts into a law. So, yes, talking about the process of course, enacting a new law for the minimum wage, what the law requires and expects is what was initiated by the government, which of course culminated in the discussions that have been going on, between the parties involved in the discussion.
I wonder how you're taking in the 400,000 naira or 60,000 naira debate as an HR professional. You've been doing this, as I said, for a while now. Any thoughts on what should be the appropriate minimum wage, or at least what factors should guide what will be the appropriate minimum wages? I would like to hear it. You have a figure or a range that you're also looking at. Don't forget, it also concerns the private sector as well. That's what we hear. Okay.
Thank you again, Kayode. First, let me say that I'm speaking as president of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management. And I would like to say that at the onset of the current discussion and in the ongoing attempt to review the national minimum wage, the CIPM was approached by the National Salary, Incomes and Wages Commission to submit a memorandum, on about 4 or 5 critical areas. One, of course, is to recommend what we think should be the appropriate minimum wage. The other is to speak to the frequency of the review, of the minimum wage. The third is around enhancing and increasing productivity, whether in the private sector or in the public sector. The fourth is around sanctions for violations, of the Minimum Wage Act. And we did work on a presentation, a memorandum which we submitted to the tripartite committee, of course, through the National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission. I'm unable to speak to the details of what we recommended because, of course, that now forms a working document, for the tripartite committee. But yes, as a body and as a professional institute, we did make recommendations to the tripartite committee on what we think should be the ideal minimum wage. Of course, our recommendation, of course, was informed, by several economic indices, the consumer price index, the GDP rate at the time, the electricity tariff, which we know affects everybody, whether you're in the private sector or in the public sector, and several other, economic indices that we think, of course, should be used to benchmark a minimum wage, for the country. And so we did make a recommendation. Like I said, that is before the tripartite committee now, and I'm sure that they did take this into consideration in the course of their discussion. Whether what we recommended is what is out there on the part of the committee, or what Labour is asking for, it's a completely different thing. But yes, we did make some recommendations.
And it shouldn't be below your recommendation, or they are above it?
I will say that we did make what, as a professional body, we believe is a very reasonable and rational recommendation. And I dare say that as things are now, we also strongly believe as a professional body that what eventually will be agreed by the parties to this discussion will be very close to what we recommended as CIPM.
Well, expectations are high about what will eventually be the middle ground between Labour and the government, and how democratic that will be in terms of, the spread across the 36 states of the Federation is another kettle of fish entirely. But let's get to productivity now, sir. And, amid this negotiation, there's been talk from the federal government about the implication of a new minimum wage and possibility that, government will be spending about 24 trillion naira as wage bill over the next 3 years. And you can do the calculation and know how much that will amount to annually. But the question really is, for more than 540 ministries, departments, and parastatals of the government. Let's even look at federal government in the first instance before we go to the states. Is that amount justified in terms of the quality of service delivered to Nigerians by the civil service, which is the engine room that executes the vision of the federal government?
Well, for those in the private sector, and productivity may mean completely different thing to them as compared to those, who work, say, in the public service. As a professional institute, we believe that whether in the public sector or in the private sector, productivity should be that which moves the needle, that which delivers quality service and improves the quality of life, for the worker, whether in the public service or also in the private sector. Now, we think that, and we suggest, and we've always recommended, that we are at a point where perhaps the public service and the civil service in Nigeria should be leaner than it currently is. A lot of people believe that we do have an overbloated public service, and it's the reason why, of course, the Oronsai committee was set up. We've had talks around the government wanting to streamline the numbers of ministries and MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies of government. We believe that the intention may not necessarily be to rationalize the workforce, but of course it will be to also reduce the over-bloated expenditure of government around the number of ministries, departments, and agencies that they have. And when this reduces, this money, of course, the savings can be plowed, into several other things. Now, because of the proliferation and the multiplicity of departments and agencies that we have, the perception is that a lot, of these departments and agencies and those who work there are somewhat inefficient. So what we advocate, is for a lot of improvement, of course, in the efficiency of those who work, say, in the public service. Now, in the organized private sector or in the private sector generally, even in the informal sector, which employs, an even larger, percentage of Nigerians than either the government or the organized private sector, you have KPIs set, every employee knows what their deliverables are supposed to be, and they are evaluated on the basis of what they then deliver, based on the KPIs, based on the deliverables, based on the tasks that have been agreed with the employer. Now, and in the private sector, this is done in such a way that it is also very smart, smart in the sense that you are sure that, whatever deliverables or KPIs have been agreed are such that are measurable, and that at the end of the day, they are also time bound. So you are able to say, look, you have delivered on X, Y, Z, and you can earn this reward. If you do not deliver, I can hold you accountable. Now, do we see that happen, in the government? This is not to say that you do not have performance evaluations happening in the government. I mean, that does happen. But again, it is in the government that we know that people expect that if I have spent 3-4 years on a particular grade, I should automatically be promoted. It's completely different, in the...
Whether or not I'm being productive.
Exactly, whether or not I'm being productive. So I think there should be a lot of emphasis, on productivity, what people can see, and of course making our public service and our civil service a lot more efficient and a lot more responsive, of course, to the needs.
So that brings us to that particular issue. You've touched on it, but I would like you to expand on it. The DG of the National Productivity Center, so I think he raised that issue about performance-based salary scheme. Yeah. For you, from your analytics right now, is this long overdue? Because as you've alluded, it's more like promotion and increase in pay should just be based on longevity in service, which is what is obtainable now. We're not saying people are not excellent at their work, but if we must improve productivity, is this time to really implement this beyond just talk shop?
I think now is the time. Well, the time to do this is, long before now. I think the time is ripe to make the National Productivity Center, answer its true name. That is, empower the center to actually work to measure, productivity, in the public service, and report, to the government. This, we believe, of course, will help not only in evaluating, of course, the performance of ministries, departments, and agencies generally, or the performance of employees, whether, in government ministries, in government departments or agencies. But we believe that it also will help in benchmarking, and in determining even the budgeting process, for the country. Not capital expenditure, but even our recurrent expenditure budgets, which of course will include things like salaries and wages, compensation and benefits. So yes, we think that the time to do this, was yesterday, not today.
So let's put an example to it, because as you're speaking, I'm thinking about the size of the civil service, and the bottlenecks and the bureaucracy and all of the elements involved. Let's take a sector. How do you want to assess a judge? If we implement these KPIs, how do you want to assess a judge? Is it based on the judgments that is delivered that are not contentious? What exactly, if you're the professional here, if you were to talk to the National Productivity Center, how to assess a judge of a magistrate court or high court? Some basics you need to look at.
Okay, first I think I would like to speak to the fact that if we're speaking about the courts and the judiciary, we must also be looking at what tools do they have to deliver, on the expectations of Nigerians or the expectations of litigants who go before them. Are these judges very well equipped, to do the jobs, that we have asked them to do? I'm a lawyer, incidentally, so I do know, for example,
that makes it easy for us.
I do know, for example, that if you speak about a magistrate or a judge, it's in so many of our jurisdictions, our magistrates and our judges still write, in longhand in courts. They have to listen to lawyer A, lawyer B speak, and they write, in longhand. This in itself, of course, takes a lot of time, So are we looking at the possibility of ensuring that we digitalize even our court systems, such that we ease the burden, that our judicial officers, whether at the magistracy or even at the superior courts, currently carry in discharging their duties? Have we looked at the possibility of not always having to bring accused persons or people who have been accused of some crime, always transporting them from the prisons to the courts, where the magistrates or the judges, adjudicate? Can we leverage digital technology, as is done in other jurisdictions, to have accused persons, for example, take their pleas or even appear virtually,
right,
before judges? If we do all of this, then maybe we can begin to ask, of our judges whether or not they are actually doing what they are supposed to do in terms of productivity,
right,
whether or not they are delivering, as they should deliver. How many of them have legal assistants who are well equipped and well trained to conduct research, to support the work of the judges?
Well, Jeffrey obviously touched on a soft spot for you, and it was as though you were waiting for it. But this goes across board, across other sectors. But it's important to just try to localize them. But since we're leaning on your experience that you have, you've also been a commissioner, right? A state commissioner, and this conversation is not just for federal government; it's also for states. They play a huge role in all of this. They probably have perhaps more workers than the federal government. The data is tough to find on that one, or equal when you put them together. I will come to the private sector, which again you sort of represent in some sense. Why has it been tough for state governments? Because you were commissioner for industry, commerce, industry, and cooperatives. Exactly. So you understand the money, how the money moves out. It translates into productivity. Why is it always tough for state governments to pay? Imagine some are not even paying 30,000 naira, and I imagine that the excuse they will have is, if not paid 30,000 naira, how can we pay this 60,000+? So does any state have should they make that excuse? I think that's the question, that they can't pay.
Okay, Kayode, thank you for that question. At the time I was commissioner, that was I left office in 1999, May. I was in the government, I handed over to the civilians. My ministry, just like you said, was called Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Cooperatives. That ministry, after we left office and politicians took over, was balkanized into about 4 ministries. And of course, so jobs were created for everybody, for so many people. So, of course, you do have an increase in the number of employees in the state. And this happened as it did in my state, as with so many other states. Most of the states, except for a state like Lagos, like Rivers, and a few others, depend on allocations from the Federal Allocation Committee, the FAC. They depend on subventions. Their internally generated revenue is very low. Yes, there may have been some improvements over the course of time, but that again is neither here nor there. So at the end of the day, most of the states actually use the subvention, to pay salaries. And that's where you have very little, of course, to spend on infrastructure development and for other capital expenditure. It's the reason why you have so many states unable to pay their counterpart funding to TED fund, to access fund for improving, educational facilities in the state. So for states that are unable to increase and improve their IGR, it then becomes impossible for them to pay even the minimum wage. The law, of course, expects that once the minimum wage is agreed, because the states as subnationals are also party to the conversation. Incidentally, I was a part of the tripartite committee. I was a member of the tripartite committee on the review of the minimum wage from the 2017-20, the one that bathed the 30,000 naira. So I know, for example, that on that committee, apart from representatives of the federal government, we had 6 state governors, representing the 6 geopolitical zones. There were hues and cry around, we will not be able to pay the 30, whatever it is you are recommending. But at the time at which we concluded the discussions then, we were all agreed, on the 30,000 which was recommended.
And no states raised objections that we can't pay.
I do not recall that any of them at that time said, we will not be able to pay.
And were they fully participatory in the meetings?
Exactly.
Yeah, they sent. I recall very well that 3 state governors were always there. Others sent their heads of service, to come and attend, and then they will come in.
But were there representatives from, across board, the other 36 states of the Federation, even if the governors were not there?
No. The way it is that the governors forum, they nominate their representatives. So the nominations were then done across the 6 geopolitical zones.
This question is...
So what I'm saying is, before an agreement, before we came to what we came to at the time, the representatives of the subnationals, just like the representatives of federal government, and those of us who are representing the organized private sector, had the opportunity to go back to our principals, to say this is where the conversation is going, and this is what we are likely, to agree, and to sign off on. So for us, when we then proposed the 30,000 naira, it was a shock, to hear that, there were states that were unable to pay for various reasons. I'm not saying that they may not have their reasons, but whatever the reasons were, of course, there was a conversation around this, and there was an agreement before it was then passed to the federal government, before a bill was prepared, and before it was then enacted into law. What then happened afterward was Labour then had to start going to states, one state after the other, to go and renegotiate, the minimum wage.
The question is important in the light of this round of negotiations, because Labour is taking issue with states for not being present at this round of negotiations, and it's quite telling about what it would mean for whatever wage is agreed upon. But it's a good thing that to know that you are part of the negotiation team for the 2017 to 2019 minimum wage negotiation. So please give us an insight into what the parameters were at that time for the breakdown and arrival at 30,000 naira. Perhaps to give us an understanding of what government is, what government's thinking is for 60,000 naira or whatever figure will be arrived at.
Okay, I will not be able to speak to what the thinking is now to arrive at that, but I think for every negotiation, what is most important and paramount, whether in the organized private sector or in the public sector, is affordability, the ability to pay. And this is why at all times, as HR practitioners and as a professional body, we always encourage parties to come, to the table with their hands open. Like we say, he who must come to equity must come with clean hands. That you put all your indices, you put all the points that you have, all the reasons that you have, all the data, that you have on the table for the other party to see. Decisions, like we always say as HR professionals, must be data driven. When you come to a negotiation, you must be able to show the other party that, look, this is where we stand. If we have to pay this much, this is what it will cost us. This is the implication, So decisions must be data driven. I would imagine and I would expect that with the current committee too, all of this, data would have been placed before members of the committee. I do not know whether there are parties to the discussion who have not been attending the conversation. But as an institute, CIPM, for example, the memorandum that we submitted, not only took cognizance of all, like I said, consumer price index, the GDP from 2019 to 2023, how the inflation index and how it has impacted the 30,000 naira that was approved, was enacted into law from 2019 to 2023. What is the value of 30,000 naira now? I mean, based on the inflation. This was what informed the recommendations that we made, as an institute to the tripartite committee. And in addition to that, is that we also feel that, as it is done in the organized private sector, discussions or wage reviews, in the organized private sector, for example.
I wanted to speak because you're already going to it, so I wanted you to expand. We don't have so much time now. Yeah. Companies are divesting. Some are even closing down. Yes. And we're trying to do a scenario planning of post-wage increase scenario here. Yeah. Because of what may happen. If companies are already divesting and closing down, what then happens to organized private sector if, let's say, we get to 100,000?
Okay. Again, let me go back to our recommendation. Our recommendation at CIPM also we did a number of scenarios. For example, in the submission that we made to the committee. Now, for the organized private sector, it is unlikely, for example, that you will find businesses that are paying below what may eventually be agreed, even when the tripartite committee completes its work. Yes, and this is because the organized private sector has a mechanism, for reviewing wages and compensation of employees in the organized private sector. And that is done, of course, through collective bargaining between the industrial unions in the respective sectors and the employer organizations that you have. Now, because of this constant reviews, sometimes it is done over a period of 2 years, 3 years, not 5 years as you have, with the national minimum wage. So you have constant reviews, in the organized private sector. So, like I said, it is unlikely, that you will have
Those that are...
Yes. So the argument will then be, now, if, for example, the tripartite committee now settles for, say, 100,000, and that is enacted into law, you know, when this comes out, the tendency, or there's a likelihood, you know, that there are people also, or businesses in the organized private sector who will say, well, we're already paying above.
In any case. So
exactly.
it doesn't have... But
exactly, 100,000.
We'll not take away the fact that they are, pardon me,
Mm-hmm.
facility staff, for example, those you can describe as cleaners, security workers who are still earning maybe 40,000, 50,000. So do you expect, because people are asking, what's the need for me? I don't work for government, but I work in the private sector and I'm earning maybe 30 or 40,000 naira. Should that also affect them if it is now 100,000 naira? Should they be bumped up?
The threshold by law, and unless this is changed, is that, I mean, we're talking of people in the informal sector now. The threshold is that the employer must, or the business must be employing a minimum of 25 employees for them to qualify, you know, for the minimum wage. For businesses that have less than 25, you know, enforcing that, you know, might be tough. I
just wanted to bring that in because a lot of people have been asking, would it reach me as well? But we have to thank you so much. This is by no means the end of the conversation, but at least we're making progress, particularly when it comes to productivity. That will naturally follow. I would like to thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed Ladan Gobir, President, Chartered Institute of Personnel Management. And let me say congratulations.
Thank you.
You just took office last week.
That's right.
So this is your very first television interview after taking office. I say congratulations and wish you the very best.
Thank you very much, Kayode, and thank you all for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, of course, we'll continue this conversation. It's important to pay attention to the productivity bit. But let's talk about what you are saying regarding the issues that we have raised. And this feedback, the very first one, is from Olaoluwa Olonrudun Sinyolani from Buhari in FCT Abuja. And it's about the conversation around minimum wage. It says the federal government should abide by their agreements to resolve all the issues on minimum wage and electricity tariff within 1 week. Masses are suffering in Nigeria, this user says, ending with God bless Nigeria prayer.
And this next one is from Low Alpha Cross from Abba, who says, I'm not an advocate of increasing workers' salaries irrationally, taking into cognizance inflation. Rather, governments at all levels should try to control the prices of goods and services by encouraging production and reasonably allowing importation of certain critical staple items for now. So that speaks to our topic, Jeffrey.
All right, exactly. So, but the next one has to do with the polls that Kayode raised earlier about designation of our politicians and their offices. They are not to be called honorables until they earn it. Excellency or other interesting titles. All our leaders are not truly leaders, they are rulers. According to Leo Liberty from Lagos.
Well, Abolori follows suit, saying governance is about integrity, commitment, dedication, focus, and selflessness. The named politicians call themselves servant leader, His Excellency. Come on, Arakuri, you even put that the ATC amount to nothing if the man or woman behind the name is dishonest and self-serving. Just say Arakuri in Yoruba means it's just a man, a mister.
A mister.
So that's actually the basic. So it's fair to call yourself Arakuri because that's mister. Anyway.
Well, that reminds us of the late Arakuri. And his soul rest in peace. And this last one, I believe, comes from KB from Takum, Taraba State. And they say, we're yet to see power restoration in Taraba almost 12 hours after NLC suspended the strike. I beg, as appealing to the power companies, if NEPA people don't go farm, make them come back, come restore lights. Now go dig. Well, we hope that that is, you know, attended to sufficiently. It reminds us of some of comments from earlier on which say that they didn't even know that the power grid was shut down. Excuse us. Power distribution companies, please attend to these matters.
Absolutely. We need to do better as governments, whether you're providing a service, people as well. But that's where we anchor on the show as anchors this morning, but not to worry. Sunrise Daily is up next. I'm Kayode Okikulu. To have a great day.
Yes, of course, we have another bumper package coming your way again tomorrow. Join us. I am Bukola Koka.
And that's it for the midweek edition. We're back again, same time tomorrow. God bless you and God bless Nigeria. I'm Jeffrey Uzoma.